Welcome to Storytime Junction, featuring the continuation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, starring
Paden Burger,
Leah Moore-Berger,
and your ever-distrusting host, Jordan Lagana.
Breach.
Yep, I mean, we're getting into the second half now. This is part 2 of A Study in Scarlet, where stuff changes. It's very different. So,
it's very Mormon.
Spoilers. Okay,
Did you know books do that?
Okay. As long as nobody looked at the table of contents before reading, this should come as a surprise to some people. All right, so are you guys ready to just roll into it?
Absolutely.
All right, love it. Let's go. A Study in Scarlet, Part 2, The Country of the Saints. Chapter 1, On the Great Alkali Plain. In the central portion of the great North American continent, there lies an arid and repulsive desert, which for many a long year served as a barrier against the advance of civilization. From the Sierra Nevada to Nebraska, and from the Yellowstone River in the north to the Colorado upon the south, is a region of desolation and silence. Nor is nature always in one mood throughout this grim district. It comprises snow-capped and lofty mountains, and dark and gloomy valleys. There are swift-flowing rivers which dash through jagged canyons. And there are enormous plains, which in winter are white with snow, and in summer are gray with the saline alkali dust. They all preserve, however, the common characteristics of barrenness, inhospitality, and misery. There are no inhabitants of this land of despair. A band of Pawnees or of Blackfeet may occasionally traverse it in order to reach other hunting grounds, but the hardiest of the braves are glad to lose sight of those awesome plains and to find themselves once more upon their prairies. The coyote skulks among the scrub, the buzzard flaps heavily through the air, and the clumsy grizzly bear lumbers through the dark ravines, and picks up such sustenance as it can amongst the rocks. These are the sole dwellers in the wilderness. In the whole world, there can be no more dreary view than that from the northern slope of the Sierra Blanco. As far as the eye can reach stretches the great flat plainland, all dusted over with patches of alkali, and intersected by clumps of the dwarfish chaparral bushes. On the extreme verge of the horizon lie a long chain of mountain peaks, with their rugged summits flecked with snow. In this great stretch of country there is no sign of life, nor of anything appertaining to life. There is no bird in the steel-blue heaven, no movement upon the dull, grey earth. Above all, there is absolute silence. Listen as one may, there is no shadow of a sound in all that mighty wilderness, nothing but silence, complete and heart-subduing silence. It has been said there is nothing appertaining to life upon the broad plain. That is hardly true. Looking down from the Sierra Blanco, one sees a pathway traced out across the desert, which winds away and is lost in the extreme distance. It is rutted with wheels and trodden down by the feet of many adventurers. Here and there are scattered white objects which glisten in the sun and stand out against the dull deposit of alkali. Approach and examine them. They are bones, some large and coarse, others smaller and more delicate. The former have belonged to oxen, and the latter to men. For 1,500 miles one may trace this ghastly caravan route by these scattered remains of those who had fallen by the wayside. Looking down on this very scene, there stood upon the 4th of May, 1847, a solitary traveller. His appearance was such that he might have been the very genius or demon of the region. An observer would have found it difficult to say whether he was nearer to 40 or to 60. His face was lean and haggard, and the brown parchment-like skin was drawn tightly over the projecting bones. His long brown hair and beard were all flecked and dashed with white. His eyes were sunken in his head and burned with an unnatural luster, while the hand which grasped his rifle was hardly more fleshy than that of a skeleton. As he stood, he leaned upon his weapon for support, and yet his tall figure and the massive framework of his bones suggested a wiry and vigorous constitution. His gaunt face, however, and his clothes, which hung so baggily over his shriveled limbs, proclaimed what it was that gave him that senile and decrepit appearance. The man was dying from hunger and from thirst. He had toiled painfully down the ravine and onto this little elevation in the vain hope of seeing some signs of water. Now the great salt plain stretched before his eyes, and the distant belt of savage mountains, without a sign anywhere of plant or tree which might indicate the presence of moisture. In all that broad landscape there was no gleam of hope. North and east and west he looked with wild, questioning eyes, and then he realized that his wanderings had come to an end, and that there, on that barren crag, he was about to die.
Why not here as well as in a feather bed 20 years hence?
He muttered, as he seated himself in the shelter of a boulder. Before sitting down, he had deposited upon the ground his useless rifle, and also a large bundle tied up in a grey shawl, which he had carried slung over his right shoulder. It appeared to be somewhat too heavy for his strength, for in lowering it, it came down on the ground with some little violence. Instantly, there broke from the grey parcel a little moaning cry, and from it there protruded a small, scared face with very bright brown eyes and two little speckled, dimpled fists.
"You've hurt me,"
said a childish voice reproachfully.
Have I, though?
The man answered penitently.
I didn't go for to do it.
As he spoke, he unwrapped the grey shawl and extricated a pretty little girl of about 5 years of age, whose dainty shoes and smart pink frock with its little linen apron all bespoke a mother's care. The child was pale and wan, but her healthy arms and legs showed that she had suffered less than her companion.
How is it now?
He answered anxiously, for she was still rubbing the towsy golden curls which covered the back of her head.
"Kiss it and make it well,"
she said, with perfect gravity, shoving the injured part up to him.
"That's what Mother used to do. Where's Mother?"
Mother's gone. I guess you'll see her before long.
"Gone, eh?"
said the little girl.
"Funny, she didn't say goodbye. She most always did if she was just going over to Auntie's for tea, and now she's been away 3 days. Say, it's awfully dry, ain't it? Ain't there no water nor nothing to eat?"
No, there ain't nothing, dearie. You'll just need to be patient a while, and then you'll be all right. Put your head up against me like that, and then you'll feel bullier. It ain't easy to talk when your lips is like leather, but I guess I'd best let you know how the cards lie. What's that you've got?
"Pretty things, fine things,"
cried the little girl enthusiastically, holding up 2 glittering fragments of mica.
"When we goes back to home, I'll give them to Brother Bob."
You'll see prettier things than them soon,
said the man confidently.
You just wait a bit. I was going to tell you, though. You remember when we left the river?
"Oh, yes."
Well, we reckoned we'd strike another river soon, do you see? But there was something wrong. Compasses or map or something, and it didn't turn up. Water ran out, just except a little drop for the likes of you and...
"And you couldn't wash yourself,"
interrupted his companion gravely, staring up at his grimy visage.
No, nor drink. Mr. Bender, he was the first to go, and then Indian Pete, and then Mrs. McGregor, and then Johnny Hones, and then, dearie, your mother.
"The mother's a debtor, too,"
cried the little girl, dropping her face in her pinafore and sobbing bitterly.
Yes. They all went except you and me. Then I thought there was some chance of water in this direction, so I heaved you over my shoulder and we tramped it together. It don't seem as though we've improved matters. There's an almighty small chance for us now.
"Do you mean that we are going to die, too?"
asked the child, checking her sobs and raising her tear-stained face.
I guess that's about the size of it.
"Why didn't you say so before?"
she said, laughing gleefully.
"You gave me such a fright. Why, of course, now as long as we die, we'll be with Mother again."
Yes, you will, dearie.
"And you too. I'll tell her how awful good you've been. I'll bet she meets us at the door of heaven with a big pitcher of water and a lot of buckwheat cakes, hot and toasted on both sides like Bob and me was fond of. How long will it be first?"
I don't know. Not very long.
The man's eyes were fixed upon the northern horizon. In the blue vault of the heaven there had appeared 3 little specks, which increased in size every moment, so rapidly did they approach. They speedily resolved themselves into 3 large brown birds, which circled over the heads of the 2 wanderers, and then settled upon some rocks which overlooked them. They were buzzards, the vultures of the west, whose coming is the forerunner of death.
cocks and hens.
cried the little girl gleefully, pointing at their ill-omened forms and clapping her hands to make them rise.
Say, did God make this country?
In course he did,
said her companion, rather startled by this unexpected question.
He made the country down in Illinois, and he made the Missouri.
The little girl continued.
I guess somebody else made the country in these parts. It's not nearly so well done. They forgot the water and the trees.
What would you think of offering up prayer?
The man asked diffidently.
It ain't night yet.
She answered.
It don't matter. It ain't quite regular, but he won't mind that, you bet. You say over them ones that you used to say every night in the wagon when we was on the plains.
Why don't you say some yourself?
The child asked, with wondering eyes.
I disremember them,
he answered.
I ain't said none since I was half the height of that gun. I guess it's never too late. You say them out, and I'll stand by and come in on the choruses.
Then you'll need to kneel down, and me too.
She said, laying the shawl out for that purpose.
You've got to put your hands up like this. It makes you feel kind of good.
It was a strange sight, had there been anything but the buzzards to see it. Side by side on the narrow shawl knelt the two wanderers, the little prattling child and the reckless, hardened adventurer. Her chubby face and his haggard, angular visage were both turned up to the cloudless heaven in heartfelt entreaty to that dread being with whom they were face to face, while the two voices, the one thin and clear, the other deep and harsh, united in the entreaty for mercy and forgiveness. The prayer finished, they resumed their seat in the shadow of the boulder until the child fell asleep, nestling upon the broad breast of her protector. He watched over her slumber for some time, but nature proved to be too strong for him. For 3 days and 3 nights, he had allowed himself neither rest nor repose. Slowly, the eyelids drooped over the tired eyes, and the head sunk lower and lower upon the breast, until the man's grizzled beard was mixed with the gold tresses of his companion, and both slept the same deep and dreamless slumber. Had the wanderer remained awake for another half-hour, a strange sight would have met his eyes. Far away on the extreme verge of the alkali plain, there rose up a little spray of dust, very slight at first, and hardly to be distinguished from the mists of the distance, but gradually growing higher and broader until it formed a solid, well-defined cloud. This cloud continued to increase in size until it became evident that it could only be raised by a great multitude of moving creatures. In more fertile spots, the observer would have come to the conclusion that one of those great herds of bisons which graze upon the prairie land was approaching him. This was obviously impossible in these arid wilds. As the whirl of dust drew nearer to the solitary bluff upon which the two castaways were reposing, the canvas-covered tilts of wagons and the figures of armed horsemen began to show up through the haze, and the apparition revealed itself as being a great caravan upon its journey for the west. But what a caravan! When the head of it had reached the base of the mountains, the rear was not yet visible on the horizon. Right across the enormous plain stretched the straggling array, wagons and carts, men on horseback and men on foot, innumerable women who staggered along under burdens, and children who toddled beside the wagons or peeped out from under the white coverings. This was evidently no ordinary party of immigrants, but rather some nomad people who had been compelled from stress of circumstances to seek themselves a new country. There rose through the clear air a confused clattering and rumbling from this great mass of humanity, with the creaking of wheels and the neighing of horses. Loud as it was not sufficient to rouse the two tired wayfarers above them. At the head of the column there rode a score or more of grave, iron-faced men, clad in somber homespun garments and armed with rifles. On reaching the base of the bluff, they halted and held a short council among themselves. "The wells are to the right, my brothers," said one, a hard-lipped, clean-shaven man with grizzly hair.
To the right of the Sierra Blanco, so we shall reach the Rio Grande,
said another. "Fear not for water," cried a third. "He who could draw it from the rocks will not now abandon his own chosen people. Amen.
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 Amen,
responded the whole party. They were about to resume their journey when one of the youngest and keenest-eyed uttered an exclamation and pointed up at the rugged crag above them. From its summit there fluttered a little wisp of pink, showing up hard and bright against the grey rocks behind. At the sight, there was a general reining up of horses and unslinging of guns, while fresh horsemen came galloping up to reinforce the vanguard. The word Redskins was on every lip.
There can't be any in-number Injuns here,
said the elderly man who appeared to be in command.
We have passed the Pawnees, and there are no other tribes until we cross the great mountains.
Shall I go forward and see, Brother Stangerson? Asked one of the band. And I.
And I.
And I.
And I.
Cried a dozen voices.
Leave your horses below, and we will await you here,
the elder answered. In a moment, the young fellows had dismounted, fastened their horses, and were ascending the precipitous slope which led up to the object which had excited their curiosity. They advanced rapidly and noiselessly, with the confidence and dexterity of practiced scouts. The watchers from the plain below could see them flit from rock to rock until their figures stood out against the skyline. The young man who had first given the alarm was leading them. Suddenly, his followers saw him throw up his hands, as though overcome with astonishment, and on joining him, they were affected in the same way by the sight which met their eyes. On the little plateau which crowned the barren hill there stood a single giant boulder, and against this boulder there lay a tall man, long-bearded and hard-featured, but of an excessive thinness. His placid face and regular breathing showed that he was fast asleep. Beside him lay a little child, with her round white arms encircling his brown sinewy neck, and her golden-haired head resting upon the breast of his velveteen tunic. Her rosy lips were parted, showing the regular line of snow-white teeth within, and a playful smile played over her infantile features. Her plump little white legs, terminating in white socks and neat shoes with shining buckles, offered a strange contrast to the long, shriveled members of her companion. On the ledge of rock above this strange couple there stood 3 solemn buzzards, who, at the sight of the newcomers, uttered raucous screams of disappointment and flapped sullenly away. The cries of the foul birds awoke the 2 sleepers, who stared about them in bewilderment. The man staggered to his feet and looked down upon the plain which had been so desolate when sleep had overtaken him, and which was now traversed by this enormous body of men and of beasts. His face assumed an expression of incredulity as he gazed, and he passed his bony hand over his eyes.
This is what they call delirium, I guess,
he muttered. The child stood beside him, holding on to the skirt of his coat, and said nothing, but looked all round her with the wandering, questioning gaze of childhood. The rescuing party were speedily able to convince the 2 castaways that their appearance was no delusion. One of them seized the little girl and hoisted her upon his shoulder, while 2 others supported her gaunt companion and assisted him towards the wagons.
My name is John Ferrier,
the wanderer explained.
Me and that little one are all that's left of 21 people. The rest are all dead of thirst and hunger away down in the south.
Is she your child? Asked someone.
I guess she is now,
the other cried defiantly.
She's mine because I saved her. No man will take her from me. She's Lucy Ferrier from this day on. Who are you, though?
He continued, glancing with curiosity at his stalwart, sunburned rescuers.
Seems to be a powerful lot of you.
Nigh upon 10,000, said one of the young men. We are the persecuted children of God, the chosen of the angel Morona.
I never heard tell on him,
said the wanderer.
He appears to have chosen a fair crowd of you.
Do not jest at that which is sacred, said the other sternly. We are of those who believe in those sacred writings drawn in Egyptian letters on plates of beaten gold, which were handed unto the holy Joseph Smith at Palmyra. We have come from Nauvoo, in the state of Illinois, where we have founded our temple. We have come to seek a refuge from the violent man and from the godless, even though it be the heart of the desert. The name of Nauvoo evidently recalled recollections to John Ferrier.
I see,
he said.
You are the Mormons.
We are the Mormons, answered his companions with one voice.
And where are you going?
We do not know. The hand of God is leading us under the person of our prophet. You must come before him. He shall say what is to be done with you. They had reached the base of the hill by this time, and were surrounded by crowds of the pilgrims, pale-faced, meek-looking women, strong-laughing children, and anxious, earnest-eyed men. Many were the cries of astonishment and of commiseration which arose from them when they perceived the youth of one of the strangers and the destitution of the other. Their escort did not halt, however, but pushed on, followed by a great crowd of Mormons, until they reached a wagon, which was conspicuous for its great size and for the gaudiness and smartness of its appearance. 6 horses were yoked to it, whereas the others were furnished with 2, or at most 4 apiece. Beside the driver there sat a man who could not have been more than 30 years of age, but whose massive head and resolute expression marked him as a leader. He was reading a brown-backed volume, but as the crowd approached, he laid it aside and listened attentively to an account of the episode. Then he turned to the 2 castaways. "If we take you with us," he said, in solemn words, "it can only be as believers in our own creed. We shall have no wolves in our fold. Better far that your bones should bleach in this wilderness than that you should prove to be that little speck of decay which in time corrupts the whole fruit. Will you come with us on these terms?"
"Guess I'll come with you on any terms,"
said Ferrier, with such emphasis that the grave elders could not restrain a smile. The leader alone retained his stern, impressive expression. "Take him, Brother Stangerson," he said. "Give him food and drink, and the child likewise. Let it be your task also to teach him our holy creed. We have delayed long enough. Forward, on to Zion." On to Zion!" cried the crowd of Mormons, and the words rippled down the long caravan, passing from mouth to mouth until they died away in a dull murmur in the far distance. With a cracking of whips and a creaking of wheels, the great wagons got into motion, and soon the whole caravan was winding along once more. The elder, to whose care the 2 waifs had been committed, led them to his wagon, where a meal was already awaiting them.
"You shall remain here,"
he said.
"In a few days you will have recovered from your fatigues. In the meantime, remember that now and forever you are of our religion. Brigham Young has said it, and he has spoken with the voice of Joseph Smith, which is the voice of God."
Chapter 2. The Flower of Utah. This is not the place to commemorate the trials and privations endured by the immigrant Mormons before they came to their final haven. From the shores of the Mississippi to the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, they had struggled on with a constancy almost unparalleled in history. The savage man and the savage beast, hunger, thirst, fatigue, and disease, every impediment which nature could place in the way, had all been overcome with Anglo-Saxon tenacity. Yet the long journey and the accumulated terrors had shaken the hearts of the stoutest among them. There was not one who did not sink upon his knees in heartfelt prayer when they saw the broad valley of Utah bathed in the sunlight beneath them, and learned from the lips of their leader that this was the promised land, and that these virgin acres were to be theirs forevermore. Young speedily proved himself to be a skillful administrator as well as a resolute chief. Maps were drawn and charts prepared, in which the future city was sketched out. All around, farms were apportioned and allotted in proportion to the standing of each individual. The tradesman was put to his trade, and the artisan to his calling. In the town, streets and squares sprang up, as if by magic. In the country, there was draining and hedging, planting and clearing, until the next summer saw the whole country golden with the wheat crop. Everything prospered in the strange settlement. Above all, the great temple which they had erected in the center of the city grew ever taller and larger. From the first blush of dawn until the closing of the twilight, the clatter of the hammer and the rasp of the saw was never absent from the monument which the immigrants erected to him who had led them safe through many dangers. The castaways, John Ferrier, and the little girl who had shared his fortunes and had been adopted as his daughter, accompanied the Mormons to the end of their great pilgrimage. Little Lucy Ferrier was borne along pleasantly enough in Elder Stangerson's wagon, a retreat which she shared with the Mormon's 3 wives and with his son, a headstrong forward boy of 12. Having rallied, with the elasticity of childhood, from the shock caused by her mother's death, she soon became a pet with the women, and reconciled herself to this new life in her moving, canvas-covered home. In the meantime, Ferrier, having recovered from his privations, distinguished himself as a useful guide and an indefatigable hunter. So rapidly did he gain the esteem of his new companions that when they reached the end of their wanderings, it was unanimously agreed that he should be provided with as large and as fertile a tract of land as any of the settlers, with the exception of Young himself, and of Stangerson, Campbell, Johnston, and Drebber, who were the 4 principal elders. On the farm thus acquired, John Ferrier built himself a substantial log house, which received so many additions in succeeding years that it grew into a roomy villa. He was a man of a practical turn of mind, keen in his dealings and skillful with his hands. His iron constitution enabled him to work morning and evening at improving and tilling his lands. Hence it came about that his farm and all that belonged to him prospered exceedingly. In 3 years, he was better off than his neighbors. In 6, he was well-to-do. In 9, he was rich. And in 12, there were not half a dozen men in the whole of Salt Lake City who could compare with him. From the great inland sea to the distant Wasatch Mountains, there was no name better known than that of John Ferrier. There was one way, and only one, in which he offended the susceptibilities of his co-religionists. No argument or persuasion could ever induce him to set up a female establishment after the manner of his companions. He never gave reasons for his persistent refusal, but contented himself by resolutely and inflexibly adhering to his determination. There were some who accused him of lukewarmness in his adopted religion, and others who put it down to greed of wealth and reluctance to incur expense. Others, again, spoke of some early love affair, and of a fair-haired girl who had pined away on the shores of the Atlantic. Whatever the reason, Ferrier remained strictly celibate. In every other respect, he conformed to the religion of the young settlement, and gained the name of being an orthodox and straight-walking man. Lucy Ferrier grew up within the log house, and assisted her adopted father in all his undertakings. The keen air of the mountains and the balsamic odor of the pine trees took the place of nurse and mother to the young girl. As year succeeded to year, she grew taller and stronger, her cheek more ruddy, and her step more elastic. Many a wayfarer upon the high road which ran by Ferrier's farm felt long-forgotten thoughts revive in their mind as they watched her lithe, girlish figure tripping through the wheat fields, or met her mounted upon her father's Mustang, and managing it with all the ease and grace of a true child of the West. So the bud blossomed into a flower, and the year which saw her father the richest of the farmers left her as fair a specimen of American girlhood as could be found in the whole Pacific slope. It was not the father, however, who first discovered that the child had developed into the woman. It seldom is in such cases. That mysterious change is too subtle and too gradual to be measured by dates. Least of all does the maiden herself know it, until the tone of a voice or the touch of a hand sets her heart thrilling within her, and she learns, with a mixture of pride and of fear, that a new and a larger nature has awoken within her. There are few who cannot recall that day and remember the one little incident which heralded the dawn of a new life. In the case of Lucy Ferrier, the occasion was serious enough in itself, apart from its future influence on her destiny and that of many besides. It was a warm June morning, and the Latter-day Saints were as busy as the bees whose hive they have chosen for their emblem. In the fields and in the streets rose the same hum of human industry. Down the dusty high roads defiled long streams of heavy-laden mules, all heading to the west, for the gold fever had broken out in California, and the overland route lay through the city of the elect. There, too, were droves of sheep and bullocks coming in from the outlying pasture lands, and trains of tired immigrants, men and horses equally weary of their interminable journey. Through all this motley assemblage, threading her way with the skill of an accomplished rider, there galloped Lucy Ferrier, her fair face flushed with the exercise, and her long chestnut hair floating out behind her. She had a commission from her father in the city, and was dashing in as she had done many a time before, with all the fearlessness of youth, thinking only of her task, and how it was to be performed. The travel-stained adventurers gazed after her in astonishment, and even the unemotional Indians, journeying in with their pelties, relaxed their accustomed stoicism as they marveled at the beauty of the pale-faced maiden. She had reached the outskirts of the city when she found the road blocked by a great drove of cattle, driven by a half-dozen wild-looking herdsmen from the plains. In her impatience, she endeavored to pass this obstacle by pushing her horse into what appeared to be a gap. Scarcely had she got fairly into it, however, before the beasts closed in behind her, and she found herself completely embedded in the moving stream of fierce-eyed, long-horned bullocks. Accustomed as she was to deal with cattle, she was not alarmed at her situation, but took advantage of every opportunity to urge her horse on in the hopes of pushing her way through the cavalcade. Unfortunately, the horns of one of the creatures, either by accident or design, came in violent contact with the flank of the Mustang and excited it to madness. In an instant, it reared up upon its hind legs with a snort of rage and pranced and tossed in a way that would have unseated any but a most skillful rider. The situation was full of peril. Every plunge of the excited horse brought it against the horns again and goaded it to fresh madness. It was all that the girl could do to keep herself in the saddle, yet a slip would mean a terrible death under the hoofs of the unwieldy and terrified animals. Unaccustomed to sudden emergencies, her head began to swim, and her grip upon the bridle to relax. Choked by the rising cloud of dust and by the steam from the struggling creatures, she might have abandoned her efforts in despair, but for a kindly voice at her elbow which assured her of assistance. At the same moment, a sinewy brown hand caught the frightened horse by the curb, and forcing a way through the drove, soon brought her to the outskirts. "You're not hurt, I hope, miss," said her preserver respectfully. She looked up at his dark, fierce face and laughed saucily.
I'm awfully frightened,
she said naively.
Whoever would have thought that Poncho would have been so scared by a lot of cows?
Thank God you kept your seat, the other said earnestly. He was a tall, savage-looking young fellow, mounted on a powerful roan horse, and clad in the rough dress of a hunter, with a long rifle slung over his shoulders. "I guess you are the daughter of John Ferrier," he remarked. "I saw you ride down from his house. When you see him, ask him if he remembers the Jefferson Hopes of St. Louis. If he's the same Ferrier, my father and he were pretty thick."
Hadn't you better come and ask yourself?
She asked demurely. The young fellow seemed pleased at the suggestion, and his dark eyes sparkled with pleasure. "I'll do so," he said. "We've been in the mountains for 2 months and are not over and above in visiting condition. He must take us as he finds us."
He has a good deal to thank you for, and so have I,
she answered.
He's awful fond of me. If those cows had jumped on me, he'd have never got over it.
"Neither would I," said her companion.
You? Well, I don't see that it would make much matter to you anyhow. You ain't even a friend of ours.
The young hunter's dark face grew so gloomy over this remark that Lucy Ferrier laughed aloud.
There, I didn't mean that,
she said.
Of course, you are a friend now. You must come and see us. Now, I must push along, or Father won't trust me with his business anymore. Goodbye.
"Goodbye," he answered, raising his broad sombrero and bending over her little hand. She wheeled her Mustang round, gave it a cut with her riding whip, and darted away down the broad road in a rolling cloud of dust. Young Jefferson Hope rode on with his companions, gloomy and taciturn. He and they had been among the Nevada mountains prospecting for silver, and were returning to Salt Lake City in the hope of raising capital enough to work some lodes which they had discovered. He had been as keen as any of them upon the business, until this sudden incident had drawn his thoughts into another channel. The sight of the fair young girl, as frank and wholesome as the Sierra breezes, had stirred his volcanic, untamed heart to its very depths. When she had vanished from his sight, he realized what a crisis had come in his life, and that neither silver speculations nor any other questions could ever be of such importance to him as this new and all-absorbing one. The love which had sprung up in his heart was not the sudden, changeable fancy of a boy, but rather the wild, fierce passion of a man of strong will and imperious temper. He had been accustomed to succeed in all that he undertook. He swore in his heart that he would not fail in this if human effort and human perseverance could render him successful. He called on John Ferrier that night, and many times again, until his face was a familiar one at the farmhouse. John, cooped up in the valley and absorbed in his work, had had little chance of learning the news of the outside world during the last 12 years. All this Jefferson Hope was able to tell him, and in a style which interested Lucy as well as her father. He had been a pioneer in California, and could narrate many a strange tale of fortunes made and fortunes lost in those wild, halcyon days. He had been a scout, too, and a trapper, a silver explorer, and a ranchman. Wherever stirring adventures were to be had, Jefferson Hope had been there in search of them. He soon became a favorite with the old farmer, who spoke eloquently of his virtues. On such occasions, Lucy was silent, but her blushing cheek and her bright, happy eyes showed only too clearly that her young heart was no longer her own. Her honest father may not have observed these symptoms, but they were assuredly not thrown away upon the man who had won her affections. It was a summer evening when he came galloping down the road and pulled up at the gate. She was at the doorway and came down to meet him. He threw the bridle over the fence and strode up the pathway. "I am off, Lucy," he said, taking her 2 hands in his and gazing tenderly down into her face. "I won't ask you to come with me now, but will you be ready to come when I am here again?"
And when will that be?
She asked, blushing and laughing. "A couple of months at the outside. I will come and claim you then, my darling. There's no one who can stand between us."
And how about father?
She asked. "He has given his consent, provided we get these mines working all right. I have no fear on that head."
Oh, well, of course, if you and father have arranged it all, there's no more to be said.
She whispered, with her cheek against his broad breast. "Thank God," he said hoarsely, stooping and kissing her. "It is settled then. The longer I stay, the harder it will be to go. They are waiting for me at the canyon. Goodbye, my own darling, goodbye. In 2 months you shall see me." He tore himself from her as he spoke, and flinging himself upon his horse, galloped furiously away, never even looking round, as though afraid that his resolution might fail him if he took one glance at what he was leaving. She stood at the gate, gazing after him until he vanished from her sight. Then she walked back into the house, the happiest girl in all Utah. Chapter 3. John Ferrier Talks with the Prophet. 3 weeks had passed since Jefferson Hope and his comrades had departed from Salt Lake City. John Ferrier's heart was sore within him when he thought of the young man's return and of the impending loss of his adopted child. Yet her bright and happy face reconciled him to the arrangement more than any argument could have done. He had always determined, deep down in his resolute heart, that nothing would ever induce him to allow his daughter to wed a Mormon. Such a marriage he regarded as no marriage at all, but as a shame and a disgrace. Whatever he might think of the Mormon doctrines, upon that one point he was inflexible. He had to seal his mouth on the subject, however, for to express an unorthodox opinion was a dangerous matter in those days in the land of the saints. Yes, a dangerous matter, so dangerous that even the most saintly dared only whisper their religious opinions with bated breath, lest something which fell from their lips might be misconstrued and bring down a swift retribution upon them. The victims of persecution had now turned persecutors on their own account, and persecutors of the most terrible description. Not the Inquisition of Seville, nor the German Vehmgericht, nor the secret societies of Italy were ever able to put a more formidable machinery in motion than that which cast a cloud over the state of Utah. Its invisibility, and the mystery which was attached to it, made this organization doubly terrible. It appeared to be omniscient and omnipotent, and yet was neither seen nor heard. The man who held out against the church vanished away, and none knew whither he had gone or what had befallen him. His wife and his children awaited him at home, but no father ever returned to tell them how he had fared at the hands of his secret judges. A rash word or a hasty act was followed by annihilation, and yet none knew what the nature might be of this terrible power which was suspended over them. No wonder that men went about in fear and trembling, and that even in the heart of the wilderness they dared not whisper the doubts which oppressed them. At first, this vague and terrible power was exercised only upon the recalcitrants who, having embraced the Mormon faith, wished afterwards to pervert or to abandon it. Soon, however, it took a wider range. The supply of adult women was running short, and polygamy, without a female population on which to draw, was a barren doctrine indeed. Strange rumors began to be bandied about, rumors of murdered immigrants and rifled camps in regions where Indians had never been seen. Fresh women appeared in the harems of the elders, women who pined and wept, and bore upon their faces the traces of an unextinguishable horror. Belated wanderers upon the mountains spoke of gangs of armed men, masked, stealthy, and noiseless, who flitted by them in the darkness. These tales and rumors took substance and shape, and were corroborated and recorroborated, until they resolved themselves into a definite name. To this day, in the lonely ranches of the West, the name of the Danite Band, or the Avenging Angels, is a sinister and an ill-omened one. Fuller knowledge of the organization which produced such terrible results serves to increase rather than to lessen the horror which it inspired in the minds of men. None knew who belonged to this ruthless society. The names of the participators in the deeds of blood and violence done under the name of religion were kept profoundly secret. The very friend to whom you communicated your misgivings as to the prophet and his mission might be one of those who would come forth at night with fire and sword to exact a terrible reparation. Hence, every man feared his neighbor, and none spoke of the things which were nearest his heart. One fine morning, John Ferrier was about to set out to his wheat fields when he heard the click of the latch, and, looking through the window, saw a stout, sandy-haired, middle-aged man coming up the pathway. His heart leapt to his mouth, for this was none other than the great Brigham Young himself. Full of trepidation, for he knew that such a visit boded him little good, Ferrier ran to the door to greet the Mormon chief. The latter, however, received his salutations coldly, and followed him with a stern face into the sitting-room. "Brother Ferrier," he said, taking a seat and eyeing the farmer keenly from under his light-colored eyelashes, "the true believers have been good friends to you. We picked you up when you were starving in the desert. We shared our food with you, led you safe to the chosen valley, gave you a goodly share of land, and allowed you to wax rich under our protection. Is not this so?"
"It is so,"
answered John Ferrier. "In return for all this we asked but one condition. That was, that you should embrace the true faith and conform in every way to its usages. This you promised to do, and this, if common report says truly, you have neglected."
"And how have I neglected it?"
asked Ferrier, throwing out his hands in expostulation.
"Have I not given to the common fund? Have I not attended at the temple? Have I not—"
"Where are your wives?" asked Young, looking round him. "Call them in, that I may greet them."
"It is true that I have not married,"
Ferrier answered.
"but women were few, and there were many who had better claims than I. I was not a lonely man. I had my daughter to attend to my wants."
"It is of that daughter that I would speak to you," said the leader of the Mormons. "She has grown to be the flower of Utah, and has found favor in the eyes of many who are high in the land." John Ferrier groaned internally. "There are stories of her which I would fain disbelieve, stories that she is sealed to some Gentile? This must be the gossip of idle tongues. What is the 13th rule in the code of the sainted Joseph Smith? Let every maiden of the true faith marry one of the elect, for if she wed a Gentile, she commits a grievous sin. This being so, it is impossible that you, who profess the Holy Creed, should suffer your daughter to violate it." John Ferrier made no answer, but he played nervously with his riding whip. "Upon this one point your whole faith shall be tested, so it has been decided in the Sacred Council of Four. The girl is young, and we would not have her wed gray hairs, neither would we deprive her of all choice. We elders have many heifers, but our children must also be provided. Stangerson has a son, and Drebber has a son, and either of them would gladly welcome your daughter to their house. Let her choose between them. They are young and rich, and of the true faith. What say you to that?" Ferrier remained silent for some little time with his brows knitted.
"You will give us time,"
he said at last.
"My daughter is very young. She is scarce of an age to marry."
"She shall have a month to choose," said Young, rising from his seat. "At the end of that time she shall give her answer." He was passing through the door when he turned, with flushed face and flashing eyes. "It were better for you, John Ferrier," he thundered, "that you and she were now lying blanched skeletons upon the Sierra Blanco, than that you should put your weak wills against the orders of the Holy Four." With a threatening gesture of his hand, he turned from the door, and Ferrier heard his heavy steps scrunching along the shingly path. He was still sitting with his elbows upon his knees, considering how he should broach the matter to his daughter, when a soft hand was laid upon his, and looking up, he saw her standing beside him. One glance at her pale, frightened face showed him that she had heard what had passed.
I could not help it.
she said, in answer to his look.
His voice rang through the house. Oh, Father, what shall we do?
Don't you scare yourself.
He answered, drawing her to him and passing his broad, rough hand caressingly over her chestnut hair.
We'll fix it up somehow or another. You don't find your fancy kind a lesson for this chap, do you?
A sob and a squeeze of his hand was her only answer.
No, of course not. I shouldn't care to hear you say you did. He's a likely lad, and he's a Christian, which is more than these folk here, in spite of all their praying and preaching. There's a party starting for Nevada tomorrow, and I'll manage to send him a message letting him know the hole we are in. If I know anything of that young man, he'll be back here with a speed that would whip electric telegraphs.
Lucy laughed through her tears at her father's description.
When he comes, he will advise us for the best. But it is for you that I am frightened, dear. One hears such dreadful stories about those who oppose the prophet. Something terrible always happens to them.
But we haven't opposed him yet.
Her father answered.
It will be time to look out for squalls when we do. We have a clear month before us. At the end of that, I guess we had best shin out of Utah.
Leave Utah?
It's about the size of it.
But the farm.
We will raise as much as we can in money and let the rest go. To tell the truth, Lucy, it isn't the first time I have thought of doing it. I don't care about knuckling under to any man, as these folk do to their darned prophet. I'm a freeborn American, and it's all new to me. I guess I'm too old to learn. If he comes browsing about this farm, he might chance to run up against a charge of buckshot traveling in the opposite direction.
But they won't let us leave.
His daughter objected.
Wait till Jefferson comes, and we'll soon manage that. In the meantime, don't you fret yourself, my dearie, and don't get your eyes all swelled up, else he'll be walking into me when he sees you. There's nothing to be afeared about, and there's no danger at all.
John Ferrier uttered these consoling remarks in a very confident tone, but she could not help observing that he paid unusual care to the fastening of the doors that night, and that he carefully cleaned and loaded the rusty old shotgun which hung upon the wall of his bedroom. And on that potentially frightening cultish note, we're going to have to say goodbye to the characters of Sherlock Holmes for a bit. Surprisingly little Sherlock this time around.
Quite a bit.
How did you feel about that, Paden? You didn't get to put on the old deer hunter.
You know what's
Cap.
funny is that...
What does he wear?
I don't know. The thing that he doesn't actually wear.
Yeah. What's funny is that I actually, I was excited to kind of take a little bit of a breather from the British accent, and then upon reading this Midwest,
This drawl,
South drawl of a man, and I'm like, God, why? How did Sherlock end up being easier to read than this guy?
Though I have to say, I enjoyed our brief break of hating on America. It was great. It was wonderful to just sit back
was
and
fun.
just everything was dead and cold and terrible and against nature. And I was like,
And then
comparing this to England? Like,
And then
I'm confused.
and then immediately after getting to play Assorted Mormons.
Yeah.
That was my favorite. I loved how in unison we were.
Yeah.
Yes, always.
We really synced up the clock there.
Right?
So thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of Storytime Junction. Please follow us. You can find us on the web. We are at stjunction.com. That is ST as in storytimejunction.com. Big thanks to Micah Jess for the use of our theme song. You can find her on Twitter, Instagram, SoundCloud. Find her at Micah Jess. She does a lot of great music, and she could use your support. And as always, just a massive, massive thank you to my co-stars, Paden and Leah, for coming back to the studio yet again for more Sherlock
Always.
goodness.
You're such a sweetheart.
Oh, no, you. So, seriously, please, like, rate, subscribe. We love getting to do this, and we'd love to hear what you think about the show, because we want to keep doing it forever and a very long time. So, hopefully we will catch you guys next time on Storytime Junction.
Goodbye.
Drive safe. We love you. There are swift-flowing rivers which dash through jagged canyons. Did yours say canyons?
Mine says canyons, but with an Enye.
Yeah.
Like it's
Mine just
Spanish
says mine says canyons without the
Canyons.
N. Fire.
canyons.
Fire the. It's too jagged, sir.
Am I reading anything at this
Ontario.
point?
Yeah, you're gonna be because
Lisa, was it?
Lucy and him are together from
Got it.
the beginning.
Awesome.
Okay, so
Sorted Mormon.
Assorted Mormons.
Another great band name.
That could be another merch idea.
Yeah.
What was the other one from yesterday?
Oh gosh, what was it? We need to be writing this down.
I mean, I'll hear it on the tape eventually, but
need,
it
like,
would have been cool to know what it said.
Story time, like with the logo and everything, and then just assorted.
Oh, it was sharp as noodles.
Oh, sharp as noodles.
Assorted Mormons are sharp as noodles.
Sorted Mormons are sharp as noodles.
There it is.
All right, here we go.
That's really funny. Put your head up against me like that, and then you'll feel you'll feel bullier. But my God, are you kidding me? But I'd guessed I'd best let you know how the cards lie. What's your... Jesus.
You gotta do it again, man.
And Mr. Bender, he was the first to go. He's the first to go?
The first, the slight draw.
No, nor drink. And Mr. Bender was the first to go.
The first to go.
This is not Utah. This is not even close to a
They're
Utah.
heading to Utah.
Jesus.
Where did they come from? We don't know where they came from.
This is an English person's interpretation.
That's a good point, actually.
And this is the only character who speaks like this. All the rest of us talk normal.
He made the country down in Illinois, and he made the Missouri.
You're 5 years old.
It's just funny.
Made the Missouri.
They made the Missouri. Hold on, let me adjust.
You say over them ones that you used to say every night in the wagon when we was on the plane. Dear God in heaven. Leave your horses below and we'll wait.
Excuse me, wise one.
All right, I'm joking. Me and that little one are all that's left of 20 people. 21 people. Delirium, I can't count either.
The hell was that?
Please say it just like that.
Good Lord.
That's amazing.
1, 2, 3. We
are the Mormons.
So is it like we are the Mormons, or is it like we're the Mormons? Like, how are we saying this?
God. I just want to be done. I need you guys to say something. You're not Hope, I hope.
I'm not Hope, I'm Lucy.
There's no one who can stand between us. I imagine that being the father standing watching.
They're right there. Good.
Expostulation.
Expostulation.
Can I get you to reread since you are throwing out your hands in expostulation?
More expostulatory.
Yeah.